All right, Steve.
All righty. Good evening and welcome to the Norwood Conservation Commission meeting tonight, Wednesday, December 18th. If anybody else is recording tonight's meeting, please let us know now. All right, as we've done in the remote and hybrid environment, I'll go down the list of Conservation Commission members and just ask you to verbally confirm your attendance tonight, starting with myself. Stephen Washburn is here. Catherine Walsh.
Here.
Kalima Mustafa Woodberg.
Here.
Anil Persad.
Here.
And Kelsey Quinlan.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you for that, team. Tonight, we will start with our public hearings as per usual. We have, looks like one on the agenda. It's going to be 568, 580, 580R Pleasant Street. This is a request for determination of applicability under local number Norwood 2024-23. Applicant is Compete Fitness, represented by Nick Kelling and Company at Level Design Group. Project description is repair, repaving, and restriping of an existing parking lot within the riverfront area associated with the Neponset River. What do we say?
Good evening. My name is Dan Campbell. On behalf of the applicant, Level Design Group. If I may share my screen, show you the project in general. What we have is a project that was approved under site plan review in 2015. We have an existing building in essentially the central portion of the site. We have two residential buildings at the front portion of the site. We have a paved parking lot, which travels all the way to the rear wall that was installed. And the portion of the site over here is a gravel pavement. On the property, we did go out, Tom Schultz from Goddard Consulting will discuss. We located riverbank for the Neponset River, giving us a 200-foot riverfront zone. When we originally did the permitting in 2015, there was a question, as Carly brought up this morning, due to an application in 2014 for our abutting property, which is Mass Electric. Mass Electric used Mass GIS and essentially just gave a buffer zone to an area that's shown on Mass GIS with no other wetlands data associated with it. We, in 2015, retained Joyce Hastings, who went out, investigated the area, found there to be no wetlands, submitted a report to the then conservation agent, who required no further permitting of the project. We have since been working with the planning board on an extension of a parking lot. The parking lot in question is, as you see it on here. What we plan to do is essentially pave the majority of the gravel area in this side of the parking lot, and then repave the parking lot at the rear, of which a portion of the repaving will end up in the 200-foot buffer zone. The reason for Goddard Consulting coming in was that the GIS still shows a wetlands in the rear. So the question was asked by planning staff, ILEX, and ILEX referred to Carly. We retained Goddard and Tom to go and do an investigation. Tom did provide us with a preliminary report, which we put in the RDA application itself. And this morning, the three of us had a nice site walk, and I submitted supplemental data that I am sure Tom can also walk you through. But the project, sort of for the request for determination, is simply the repaving of the parking lot. Has its own drainage system, does not drain to any other property, drains to an on-site treated subsurface detention system. And the remainder of the project is outside of jurisdictional areas as described by Tom, and I'll take over and then hopefully if there's any questions for us.
Hi, everybody. Tom Schutz from Goddard Consulting here on behalf of the applicant. I was the one that conducted the wetland delineation and then went on the site walk this morning with Dan and Carly. We reviewed the area that you're to have a wetland on it based on the Mass DEP layer. We walked that area thoroughly, and it was the conclusion in the field that that specific area didn't have a wetland. We continued to walk the rest of the area behind the property itself to the east. If there was any additional wetland resources that were there. It was my opinion, and still is my opinion, that there's not any wetland resource areas there based on a lack of a dominance of vegetation that would be indicators of a wetland. And also there is no wetland hydrology there. In Massachusetts, when you're delineating, you need to have 2 of the 3, a wetland hydrology, or sorry, a wetland hydric soil, 50% or greater dominance of wetland vegetation, and also indicators of hydrology, and it's lacking 2 of the 3 in all of the areas. As Dan mentioned, I pulled together some DEP data sheets in 3 locations. I'm not sure if the commission had a chance to review those yet. I can just kind of share my screen, go briefly over them, and we'll go from there. So let's see if I can do this. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? This is my first time using Google Meet, so just making sure.
Yep. Looks
All
good.
right, awesome. So I conducted 3 data points today to the east of the project. Here's the building, parking lot to be renovated, and that's the off-site area in question that Carly and I and Dan walked this morning. I did 3 again, 1 which was approximately 38 feet away from the edge of the parking lot, a second spot which was around 70 feet away from the edge of the parking lot, and finally a third one which Carly had identified some sedges in there, so I wanted to make sure that we got that area identified as well and delineated with a data sheet, and that was approximately 120 feet away from the parking lot itself, which is greater than the buffer zone. It's still important to make sure that there wasn't a dominance of wetland vegetation in this spot. So these are all submitted. If you look up here, these are the data sheets that would be submitted for any wetland delineation itself. An easy way to just kind of go through without going through the sheet itself is you can see that we don't have a vegetation criterion met. That's we do, in my opinion, there was a wetland soil based on the color. There was no redoxomorphic features. There was no redox and pore linings where plant roots would be. So it was just based on the color that it was the hydric soil. And we went all the way down to 4 inches and still didn't have any of those redox features. We also didn't have any wetland hydrology present, so that was no. So 2 of the 3 criteria were not met. These areas were not sampled in a wetland. This is data point 1. You take a look at some of the vegetation seen in those areas. You can see that, as me and Carly and Dan saw, there was some silky dogwood out there for sure, but still not enough to overcome the rest of the facultative up species present out there, especially in data point 1. Here's our, so this is more our vine stratum. You can see that there was a total of 9 dominant species in this location, but only 2 of them were actually wetland indicator plants. So number 1, definitely not a wetland. Here's our soil, just for anybody that was curious out there. You see it, there was a cart, this was met, but again, no wetland hydrology. Data point 2, similar situation going on out there. No wetland vegetation criteria met. Wetland hydrology wasn't present. A little bit of a different kind of mixed bag of vegetation out there. Still had the silky dogwood, but then we start getting some more facultative up plants in the sapling layer, like black birch. That became a dominant species in number 2. We also had some tall goldenrod and such. Similar kind of vine, though. However, there's a lot of this Asian terrathum, which is also known as Milo minute-weed, which is covering everything basically out there. So that was a dominant within the vines. However, still not a dominant species, not enough wetland species in this case to be 50% or more. Here's our soils in number 2. If anybody's curious, similar situation. There's just a little bit change after the 8-inch mark. And finally, here's number 3. This is over 120 feet away from the edge of the parking lot. We don't have vegetation met. No hydric soil was met, but again, no hydrology, not a wetland. In this case, we had some sensitive firm popping up, which we saw, but not enough to be an indicator. Only 3% dominance out there. Here's our sedge, but again, we don't have enough for it to be. We only have 3 plants when we needed 4 for it to be considered 50% or greater. So again, met in this case, but I can keep going on. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. But other than that, I'll turn it back over to Dan now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Schutz. What do you say,
So from
Mr.
a site-
Campbell? Anything to
I was
add?
going to say, from a site standpoint, I believe that the RDA was the appropriate way to go. We're looking to repave the back portion of the parking lot within that 200 feet. And as we noted, there are no other wetlands on site, no other buffer zones. So we're hoping for a negative determination allowing us to continue in that isolated parking lot area.
All right, Mr. Campbell. Being remote, I cannot see the audience at the hall this evening. Do we have anybody from the community to speak in regards to this public hearing?
We do not.
All right, and I think looking at the folks present online, it is just the parties that spoke and CONCOM members, so we're good there. What do you say about this, Carly? Maybe some updates to the notes that were provided related to this hearing before we proceed with questions from the commission.
So the 3 of us went up this morning to the site, and we used an auger to take some soil samples, and it's dark soil, has a lot of organic matter in it. In terms of vegetation, it's hard at this time of year to see what grows there in the herbaceous layer, like the not woody plants. We did see some sedges. We saw a little sensitive fern, but those both grow in wetland areas and other areas, but you often see them in wetlands. You know, there's a lot of blackberry. It's a very aggressive plant, sort of grows all over. And the mile-a-minute vine grew all over everything, which sort of obstructs what you can see. It can be challenging, I think, to delineate wetlands at this time of year because it's hard to see what grows there. It is, you know, and the floodplain, I believe, of the Ponset River is right there, which affects the soil. I think what was a concern was that a wetland is shown in that area in the DEP wetlands GIS layer. And so that I was concerned that that hadn't been delineated before, and that's why we went out to take a look. I think this project is, you know, close to this area. Only a sliver of it is within the riverfront area, but there's that questionable area we walked through this morning where, you know, if you look at, it's a hydric soil, as you can see in his sheets. But I think it depends how much weight you put on each of the factors. So looking at soils, looking at vegetation, looking at hydrology. In my mind, there's still a question about that area.
If I may, I think there was kind of a misspeak on that. The soil, vegetation, and hydrology are all weighted equally. And if we can see in the data sheet that every plant that you noted you saw in our one area that was 120 feet away was noted in the data sheets, and we still don't have a dominance of wetland vegetation nor a wetland hydrologic indicator in any of those spots. We had a dark soil for sure, but we again didn't have any redoxomorphic features or streaking or anything you'd expect to see from an actual wetland, not to mention no wetland vegetation dominance. So I don't believe any of these areas are wetlands.
A question about the project itself. Is there to be any compensatory storage? Is there fill?
There's actually no fill. There's no modification of the drain system. There's no modification of the TSS removal. The area that's currently paved gravel was paved gravel with the intention of eventually paving it in this manner. We're actually removing more pavement than we are in other portions of the site. As you saw this morning, there is no islands within the parking lot. And what we've intended to do, and we were approved through the planning board, was the installation of islands at that back corner of the building, at the back end of the both rows of parking, and then planting all along the border of the property, with the intention of providing a much greater landscape than exists in the middle of this gravel parking lot today. It is, if you haven't been out there, it is a wide open parking lot as it is. And we intend to, as I said, maintain the drain system, but plant the site in a more cohesive manner.
I think there was also a question in the notes, Ms. Rockland, about the potential need for erosion controls. Was that addressed at all in your site visit or otherwise?
It was not. I wondered if you all might offer a little clarity on erosion controls planned for the rear of the parking lot.
Sure. As you saw this morning, there is a about 8-inch wall above the parking lot as it exists today. That wall contains the majority, but if you look at our site plans, what we specifically call for is erosion control in the catch basins to prevent any sediment from entering the subsurface drain system. Both subsurface drain systems have a CDS unit prior to discharge, but we want to make sure that the CDS unit isn't having to overwork for the site. I'm gonna, if everybody has not been out there, what I'd like to do is, for whatever reason, Google Street View actually drove through the site, so you can see the site as a whole, how it exists, and where we're talking about along the backside of the site. We've got a substantial berm of concrete wall along that backside. What we'd be intending, there's a catch basin in this location, and there's a catch basin in the middle of the parking lot, and then there's a catch basin at the front end of the parking lot. We'd be intending to put sediment sacks in those 3 catch basins for, the purposes of erosion control. If the question is, can we put another methodology of erosion control, we would be more than happy to put a sediment wattle along the back side of the site, should that be the request. Carly and I can discuss whether or not that's on the top of the wall or whether or not that's in front of the wall. But as you saw, there's a substantial concrete buffer.
Thank you. I found the drawing a bit hard to figure out what exactly is right there. Appreciate that.
It was very convenient that Street View decided to take a cruise through the parking lot. That was, yeah.
I have never seen them cruise through a parking lot that's not a like major shopping center. So I thought it was kind of interesting.
Works for us. Questions or comments from the commissioners? I can't see everybody, so feel free to just, in an orderly fashion, dive in.
I have no
Carly,
question.
share the plan with us. Go ahead, Adam.
No, I was just gonna say I have no questions. Thank you for the overview.
And is the existing gravel area by chance on Street View?
It is in that Street View. Where we are, you can see the gravel area has some grass growing through it. If you ask Carly what it looked like this morning, it is fully gravel at this point. So on the Street View, You can see it's gravel with some grass growing through. However, this morning it is all dense packed gravel, and has been for a number of years. But this is the general idea of what it looks like today.
Do you mean at the corner of?
Any aspect.
Sure. So this is the general view of what it looks like. These plants died during the drought last year, so they are all proposed to be replaced.
Thank you.
Did I hear you mention, Dan, that the overall pervious versus impervious is actually, the impervious is increasing after all that island work and stuff that you described?
So the overall impervious is increasing by 803 square feet. We are decreasing in the middle of the parking lot. As you saw, there's no landscaping in the middle of the parking lot at all. So we intend to plant the middle of the parking lot to create a tree canopy. We have 3 large deciduous trees to be planted and 10 smaller evergreens, plus the required shrubbery and ground covers by the planning board.
Okay, and in that, excuse me, in that small corner that's inside the 200-foot, there's no change to the footprint of the impervious surface. You're just repairing or resurfacing what is already there. Mhm.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so we addressed the wetland delineation concern and comment. It sounds like maybe even during previous application efforts, there is some activity related to that. It sounds like Carly has some question or concern still maybe about certain areas of that wetland area, in particular during the winter months, and being able to ascertain with confidence what's being described. There is no fill in the resource area, no compensatory storage required or planned as a result of that. We discussed erosion control stuffs. So in the catch basins is going to be some controls and a willingness from the applicant to use a wattle or similar solution on the corner near the resource area to further protect or reinforce that area. Saw the street view that was helpful with that curbing or buffer there on the back edge. That'll provide some control of its own. And I think there was a note about stormwater management in general, but it sounds like there's going to be no modification to the stormwater system. And is there any sense that that additional impervious surface, like the existing stormwater system, is adequate to support that?
Certainly. So we did submit a full stormwater analysis to the planning board as part of our application. The overall is a decrease from the pre-existing conditions because this plan was intended, and during the 2015 application, we knew that eventually this would be paved. So we did plan it into the stormwater system.
I see. So that was incorporated in the initial design.
Correct. Because we didn't want to rip up the parking lot because it's all subsurface drainage. So the last thing we wanted to do is create more ground disturbance with the intended modifications.
What do you think, Kalima?
I'm wondering for the plantings that you are planning, has there been any consideration for planting species that are native to the area?
So the requirement of the planning board, the planning staff has approved this, or the planning board approved this as a site plan modification. The one condition that's not a standard condition is that not only that we plant it with native, but we overplant it. So they've asked us to create a planting plan to work through with Ilex, and I'd be happy to do the same with Carly to make sure that not only are they all native, but they're species that are going to survive in the environment that we're in. Thank you.
So that means
Catherine?
that the Ilex crenata will be replaced?
Ilex will be reviewing the planting plan.
No, in the planting plan, there's Ilex crenata.
Yes, that's intended to be replaced with another species. Correct.
I'm having a revelation over here.
It sounds good to me, Steve. Thank you.
Catherine, what do you say?
Good. It sounds good.
So Carly, I think there was a lot of valid considerations about delineation concerns, some of the other questions that were asked. I think the native question and otherwise, these are all valid and good. With some of these new factors considered, what are you thinking about recommended next steps on this?
I think that as a Conservation Commission, we would generally want to see the stormwater calculations, make sure everything is appropriate. I think that it's in the riverfront area, however small of an area it is, and our bylaw calls for an alternatives analysis, which we haven't seen. Those are two of my thoughts, which would be toward supporting a positive determination of applicability. Those are a couple of thoughts in terms of. I would not check off the approval of wetland delineation for this one. I think that could take some more thought. I think that's my 2 cents.
So I can honestly say if there's a positive determination, we simply won't pave the back parking lot. At this point, with a planning board approval, a project which is taking existing gravel and turning it into pavement, taking existing pavement and turning it into landscaping, all of which was planned, as I said in a response prior. We did have a delineation in 2015 that was done during the summer in the original application. The original conservation agent at the time accepted Joyce Hastings' report and did not require us to file anything with the commission. This time at recommendation, we filed an RDA because we do have that small portion that's in the corner that's in the riverfront. Understanding that an alternatives analysis is required, the alternative is simply not paving it.
I see where you were going with that. Okay. So it sounds like that would be the extent of, and typically this board doesn't really appreciate, I would say, just being told there is no alternative. But if that's the case, that's the case. Yeah, what do you think about this, Catherine? I tend to just generally lean towards the recommendation of our agent and the sentiment of the commission. In this case, I think that it is a very small corner. And I'm individually not wildly concerned about this activity, but yeah, what do you think, Catherine?
So I guess I'm leaning towards that, but you know, Carly, you mentioned it about the stormwater calculations. So apparently the planning board looked at those and seemed comfortable with that. Do you think we would be looking at those with a different lens? So there would be a benefit from us reviewing those?
So I simply can say, as far as the stormwater calculations go, I would be happy to provide them, but these are the generalized overall numbers. So control point R3 is the control point that discharges towards the roadway, towards Pleasant Street. Control point R2 is the portion of the property that discharges on site to the existing multifamily house. R1 is our control point that discharges to the rear. Because of the removal of pavement in the rear, we're actually decreasing the CFS in that control point. I certainly can submit the entire documentation, but it was reviewed by the planning board and approved at their last public hearing.
So I think that to that statement, Mr. Campbell, I would just ask Ms. Rockland, and I think Catherine already really asked this question, and that's just that based on what Mr. Campbell just showed us and based on the review performed by the planning board, is there a different lens, a different factor that we would be considering in what he's just reviewed that would be extraordinary to what's already been reviewed by that group? Is there something else you're looking for in that report?
I haven't reviewed, the stormwater report because we weren't provided it. I haven't spoken with, the planning board about this, so I don't feel comfortable, saying yes to something I haven't seen. I think they look through it in the lens that we would look through it, but as a conservation commission, I think that's part of our duty is to look at a stormwater report, which we haven't seen.
And I simply didn't submit it. We're not modifying it.
So would
Okay,
we
So,
submitting it and deferring till the next meeting so we can take a look at it?
The applicant has his building permit application currently in. This was a stumbling block that we did not expect. So there is some expedience that we were hoping for. Certainly with the limited activity. If the request for determination, as I said, if there's a positive determination proposed due to the area of the riverfront, we'll simply not repave that area.
How big's the area?
It's about 300 square feet.
So is this also, if you receive a positive determination of applicability, and there's still some concern remaining about that, potential wetland area at the back, does this also mean that you would not be paving within 100 feet of that potential wetland area that's under question? Or are
So
you
the
just?
potential that's under question is currently 120 feet away from what we're doing. That was the one area that was being questioned with the sedges today. We did measure it. We measured it in two different methodologies. The closest point I got was 120 feet from the backside of the wall, not from the parking lot as a parking lot proper. So we by default are outside of the 100 feet.
If we were to look at Tom's wetland delineation sheet, and in it, there's a illustration of the distance of the points.
Sure.
From, I think one is, there are 3 points, 3 different distances in there.
Correct. And in the first point, and I know Tom can speak to it, in the first point, there was even less vegetation than there was in the third point. The third data point had a greater amount of vegetation in it. And while I understand that it is difficult to identify plants, as you can attest, even in the pictures, you can still see some of these plants have green leaves on them. So I do understand that it's difficult, but in a year that we've barely had too many freezes, it's not as difficult as it would be if we were under 3 feet of snow. I do fully trust our experts. And again, it's the second expert. If we count the first conservation agent, the third expert, we've had to look at this very same area.
well, I hear what you're saying, Mr. Campbell, but something that was delineated or observed several years ago is likely to change considerably between then and now. So the more recent observations, I personally have a lot more interest in than something that was approved by at this point, long since retired agent that, I did work with, but that's my sentiment regarding that.
Oh, I understand, which is why we went and retained Goddard, who went out, I believe, 3.5 weeks ago now for the first investigation, and went out again today and dug in the data points that we were specifically requested. As Carly can attest, we dug in probably 4 additional locations, not just these 3 locations. Tom spent an additional couple of hours on site documenting the plants as well, and that is why we have a wetland scientist, because they can identify the plants with or without fully foliage. There's a lot of leaves on the ground. There's easily identifiable plants. I do understand the concern, and as you know, in other situations, we have absolutely gone along with the concern is the most that we can do in this particular area. I do not believe that there is a wetlands there. The area that's mapped by DEP's GIS is almost 5.5 feet higher than the surrounding area. I think it's just a poor mapping.
Yeah, I do appreciate the level of accuracy that you can expect from the DEP wetlands layer. As a GIS professional, I know a lot of that is just photogrammetry and machine learning, and you hope to use some of the raster analysis along with LiDAR data to reach a confidence, but it certainly is not really acceptable to use in lieu of a true wetland delineation or site survey kind of thing. So I hear you on that one. So I guess just to kind of repeat what I think I'm understanding, we have a situation here where there's a small corner of the site and what's proposed to be resurfaced that is in the riverfront area. Ms. Rockland has expressed some concern of surrounding the wetland delineation, the time of year of the delineation. It has been described by the applicant that if positive determination is levied here, that then their intention would be to exclude the area, that triangle that's within the buffer zone, and to try to proceed with just paving the remainder of the lot. I think I heard Carly say that she would still throw a flag on that and feel like there's a concern about the delineation, and that if it's close enough to the lot and the buffer zones of this delineation that's in question would encroach into the lot, then it might not be cool to proceed in the way that's been described. So is that correct, Carly? Do I have that right?
Yes, yes.
I do have to say, the original delineation was done, the original investigation was done the 7th of November. It was done 6 weeks ago. And if you look at the pictures that we submitted in the RDA, there was still a substantial amount of foliage on the individual plants. We're not doing this in a vacuum, for sure.
I
Yeah,
also want to
certainly.
note that some of the plants that Carly did bring up were herbaceous plants that you'd expect to see not there during winter conditions, but we still saw them during this delineation. So I don't know if it's accurate to say that you'd expect to see additional herbaceous plants coming up during the spring period. What's there was there. We saw it. We saw sensitive fern. We saw all of the tall goldenrod. I mean, those are all herbaceous plants, and I wouldn't expect to see additional herbaceous plants coming up now that spring is coming along. We saw those in the field. So even with the spring or when the timing of the delineation, you wouldn't expect to see any additional herbaceous plants coming up in the areas that herbaceous plants already existed.
So for the benefit of the commission, and in particular some of our newer commissioners, it strikes me that really there's several directions to head with this. Okay. There's the positive determination, and I think I described what we could expect in summation from what we've heard tonight just now. Negative determination would allow the applicant to proceed with their project as they've requested. And then the continuance, which I think Catherine mentioned, would give Ms. Rockland and the rest of the team an opportunity to review the stormwater calculations that do exist but weren't provided with the submittal. Sometime to let the lack of alternatives, not to say there's no alternatives analysis, but the alternative presented is we just won't do it. So give that some time to marinate, I suppose. And there has been a statement from the applicant describing a need for urgency as we could provide, but I'm always the one to say there's a process to these sort of things, and the application deserves consideration, the process deserves consideration, and the regulations at the state and local level deserve consideration regardless of the time of year or holiday season. So with all that being said, I think those are the ways forward here, and I think you can certainly taste what people are hoping for, but I think that's where we're at. And I, for one, hear what our agent is saying and think that at the least perhaps a continuance might be appropriate to allow review of the stormwater plan and some of that other information that was described. But yeah, curious what others think.
Steve, so the stormwater plan, I totally agree. We haven't seen it, but I think what I heard Carly say is they're probably looking at it from the same lens we are. Secondly, I guess, and Carly, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you're having some apprehension about the wetlands delineation, but they hired a wetland delineation company. I do agree that the the climate has been so warm this season, and like we haven't had any freezes, and so I don't know that we would expect anything different in the spring, that would change the delineation. So I guess, Steve, I have to say, part of me is that, you know, I hear what Carly is saying, and I'm totally respectful, and granted, we haven't seen the stormwater, but I'm not convinced that it's going to really change our mind. I'm sort of leaning towards a negative determination. So just throwing that out there.
What do you say, Anil?
Sorry, I'm on mute. I would consider the continuance.
And just to be clear, the continuance would be so that we could look at the stormwater report, or are we suggesting that the wetlands delineation is still under consideration as part of the continuance?
I think that's open for discussion. It could be a continuance to allow review of the stormwater report if Ms. Rockland sees fit. I don't know if we ever go to the length of a peer review of a delineation for a determination of applicability, but if there's that much interest in it, I suppose that could be a potential.
I feel like
Sure.
their applicant is already saying that if we're gonna give them a positive, they're gonna pull paving out. So is this project worthy of a peer review? I sort of question that.
I think I would welcome Mr. Campbell to correct me, but my understanding of that statement is that if there's a positive determination, it's not that they're not going to pave the lot, it's just they're not going to pave that 300
Right.
square feet rear corner that's in question there. And it sounded to me like Carly still had a potential issue with the delineation of the wetland and the buffer zones encroaching on other areas of the parking lot. But I don't
And-
disagree with what you're expressing, Catherine.
So what I can say is the first discussion regarding the site, this particular site, occurred 4.5 months ago, where we went to the design review or the technical review committee. In the preceding or the following months, wetlands was never mentioned. It wasn't until the end of October that we had the first question on the wetlands delineation and whether or not the GIS was correct. That was the actual specific request, was whether or not the GIS was correct. So we retained a wetland scientist immediately, supplied all of the information. There was plenty of time for anybody to request documentation, drainage, or anything else, because it has been with technical review, of which Carly did attend, for months. So I understand, but I think that there has been a lot of time dedicated to this already. This was not a snap decision. You know, we're right now 5 weeks from when we first made the delineation and emailed, because the original request was a delineation to make sure there was no wetlands. The follow-up request was to submit an RDA after we submitted a delineation that showed that there was no wetlands. So I'm a little disillusioned at the overall activity on the site and how we got to where we are, that we're questioning a delineation now, when the first meeting on this was in May.
So Dan, when you say technical review, the technical review for planning?
When we submit to planning, every department head is invited to a technical review. The planning staff, fire department, police department, Department of Public Works, building department, conservation, all of whom is invited to comment on the application the minute it comes in. That was done. We received comments. None of the comments were from the Conservation Commission or conservation staff. The first comment we received was actually from ILEX. ILEX said in her final review, she noted that there was a wetlands offsite on the GIS map. What we said was we would immediately hire a wetlands consultant, and we did that. We submitted that report, and we were told that one of the conditions of the planning approval would be an RDA. So we filed the RDA because it was going to be a condition of the planning approval. In that time period, until I was asked, we had no questions on wetlands whatsoever. Again, because we had done this once before.
Thanks for that history.
What do
It's
you
helpful because this is the first time any of the commissioners are hearing about this, right?
Oh, understand.
Got it. Okay.
Kelsey, where are you?
So I think if any of our hesitations regarding the delineation is based on soils or hydrology, then, I think that, gives us room for pausing. But I do agree that I think the vegetation with the, how it hasn't been that cold lately, I do think that could be considered reliable. And in that case, I'd be comfortable with issuing a negative determination.
Kalima, where are you?
Yeah, I would have to echo what Catherine and Kelsey have already stated. I definitely understand the pause for concern and would consider a continuance, though I don't feel strongly that reviewing the stormwater data would actually change my opinion. And I don't feel any sort of strong hesitation towards a negative.
All right. Well, if I were sitting next to you in person, Catherine, I would turn to you and I would say, based on the sentiment of the commission, if it would please the commission, I think we could entertain a motion to close the public hearing and issue a negative determination of applicability.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Kelsey. As we've done in the remote and hybrid environment, I'll go down the list of Conservation Commission members and ask you to verbally state your position on this vote, starting with myself. Stephen Washburn is in favor. Aye. Catherine Walsh. Halima Mustafa.
Aye.
Anil Prasad.
Aye.
Kelsey Quinlan.
Aye.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here tonight, applicant and representative, and thank you for the relative patience as we explored some of these considerations.
Absolutely. Always happy to answer questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Next up on the agenda, I think on my agenda anyways, that's the only public hearing I have listed. We can move into wetland issues and updates, starting with Ellis Pond Dam repair. I'm actually excited about a couple of these. What do you say, Carly?
These are just updates. I wanted to say that the Ellis Pond dam repair is done. So the seal was replaced. It's not leaking. It looks good. So that's exciting. That will help with the operation of Ellis Dam. The folks who did the repair will be in touch with DPW to help explain how to maintain the gates into the future so that the seals remain in good shape long term. That's exciting.
That's exciting.
That is exciting.
With the Willett Pond Dam repair is ongoing. The deadline is December 25th. So we'll be having one more meeting to see, when it's significantly complete. I was just at the 50% completion meeting. So it's just communication is ongoing, and I'm waiting to hear back.
This one is interesting because I've driven by a bunch. Carly, this is where they have that boat, right? In the like floated area.
Yes.
I've been so curious as I drive by so often, like what the heck they were doing over there with the boat and everything. So that's cool to hear an update on that.
Yeah.
All right. So those were our updates under wetland issues and updates. Next up on the agenda, Conservation Commission business, CPC report from none other than Catherine Walsh.
All right. So we met last Wednesday, and we were still waiting to receive a final application from the town manager. and they made the decision to pull the 4 applications. Just as a reminder, the 4 were the annual town reports and the town hall archive inventory, which were under historical preservation. And then there was the Shattuck Park wall restoration, and then the Chapel Street Park construction design. And so, you know, I think the CPC didn't have a lot of issue with the 2 historical projects, but we're somewhat concerned about the open space projects, the Shattuck Wall and the Chapel Street Park, because there was limited community outreach. And there was also some concern, so we saw a schematic design of the Chapel Hill Street Park, which by the way was lovely. There was like a water feature, and it was really sort of reconfiguring that into like a passive use park that looked like it would be beautiful. But I think there was some concerns about how the funding would happen for the construction of it, because it was in the order of $5 million. So, so the town manager's office pulled those applications. So we have 8 still in the queue. So there's the St. Gabriel Chapel and Highland Cemetery listing them on the National Register. We have the Shared Housing Service Organization, Sarah's work, Washington Heights roof replacement, the Conservation Fund transfer, the Guile Pond Restoration Feasibility Study. Carly, shout out to you, got like amazing kudos for the completeness of the application. And so everyone was very excited about that. And then we've got the Elliott Field study, the Falls Ramp, which there's a lot of discussion about that, ADA accessibility down to some repairs that were done that were funded by the CPC. And one of the requirements was an ADA ramp, and they had proposed a metal ramp, and they realized that that wasn't going to meet the needs. And so they're looking for $175,000 to construct a concrete ramp that has a bunch of switchbacks. And so still more work on that area. And then I think you guys know about the Pollinator Park. We talked about that and identified the Concom as a location. So CDC was sort of jazzed about that. So no meetings for the rest of the year. And then we have public hearings where the proponents will come in and discuss about their application beginning, I think the second week in January. So I think we have 3 meetings scheduled. I think Kristen's trying to get do 4 and 4. So it will be, I wish I knew the dates. I'll share that with you guys in an email just so you have a sense if you want to listen in. All right, that's it. CPC.
Kylie, I would volunteer if you need any backup to speak at any of those hearings in support of the conservation applications. In particular, you know, I'm passionate about the Guile Pond thing.
Well, the other thing that was really good about the $10,000 transfer is there's that land, the sliver parcel at the Bernie Cooper Park. And so Joe was able to say that, you know, this is exactly why CBT makes the transfer to Concom, and that this is how we use funds like that. So I'm feeling relatively positive about those 2 projects. So, but anyway, totally, I think it would help Steve. So thank you.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, Catherine. Next up on the agenda, also under Conservation Commission business, we have our agent update from Carly.
Hi, I do not have anything to report.
Oh, good news. Happy holidays, right? That's about it.
All right, then give me one more motion.
Just one last question, Steve, for Kelsey. How was the open house for the comprehensive plan? I couldn't make it.
Oh, it was very well attended. It went very well. And if you couldn't attend, that's fine. There'll be a survey, an online, form in which you can put your thoughts there. So
Awesome.
we're
Thank you.
still gathering opinions.
That's great. Thank you.
It truly is one of the best examples of public outreach I've seen at all, like from Norwood Day to these activities. It's righteous.
All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Carly. As we've done in the remote and hybrid environment, I'll go down the list of Conservation Commission members and ask you to verbally state your opinion on this vote, starting with myself. Stephen Washburn is in favor. Aye. Catherine Walsh. Halima.
Aye.
Anil.
Aye.
Kelsey.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you for that, and happy holidays, everybody.
Thank
Happy
you, guys.
holidays.
Bye.
You take care.
Like some signature stuff? Yeah.